Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm so glad to be here to continue our study in General Biblical Introduction. A couple of announcements before we get to class tonight, or tonight. Tonight's programs have changed. The only thing that's changed is the time, and I've bumped the programs up an hour, back an hour, I should say, so, because I noticed later it's on a little bit that the audience is more because we're also used to the connects being at 7 o'clock Eastern, and so I have appropriately moved our the sessions up an hour or back an hour, however you want to say it, to where the Truth and Love program will be 6 Eastern time, and then the Connect meeting tonight will be at 7, as it always is at 7. And tonight's session is going a speaker by the name of James R. Turner Jr. And there will be there's no relation to Rex Turner, but he is from a family of preachers, and he graduated from Tri-Cities School of Teaching, and I know he will do a great job. His lesson will be via video. He was not able to be here live this evening, but he did send me a record. He did volunteer to send a recording of his lesson, and I said that would be fine, and that I'm looking forward to that, and some good things going on. And as far as the online school of theology, I've been thinking about adding an international portion of this, and I would like to go and have online schools in a broad nation such as Canada and other countries that may be interested. If I can find congregations that be willing to take upon that effort, and of course, I don't be the main guy teaching it, but I want to make sure that the Lord's Church is being added to not only here in the United States but also in abroad, and I want to do whatever I can. So I don't know what that's going to entail, and it's just a thought. It may be one of those things that falls through the cracks, but that's where my heart is, and that's what I want to do. And of course, my local work here at Hannibal is my main thing, so I can't let anything else take the place of my work here. So let's get started with our session today in General Biblical Introduction. Uh, and being that the screen share covers up the comments, I will not be able to see the comments. I'm normally Thursdays my days off, but being I had some things I had to do yesterday, I decided to take the day, and I'm basically doing this from my house, so I don't have my computer monitor to have a second monitor to see your comments. So I do apologize for that. By the way, as we get started with this, the plan is next week will be our final session in General Biblical Introduction, and we're hopefully going to get started with translations today. And then next week we will finish out General Biblical Introduction by viewing some of the translations that are available and which ones that I would suggest. And of course, I'm not going to say if you use one translation over another that you have to agree with me. Just like Brother Jenkins, you don't have to agree with me, but it's good to look at different versions. So let's talk about New Testament manuscript credibility, which is we're going to focus on uncials. And we're not going to go through every single chapter that's in this section because the time will not allow it. And some of these things are not redundant. They're important, but they'll be good for further study. And I have a certain goal to meet. New Testament credibility is firmly established by the voluminous amount of the manuscripts available. However, the evidence from the first 2.5 centuries after Christ, because of the persecution of the church, is most fragmentary, yet even the fragments, when pieced together, give the unique impression of a unified text as early as the 2nd century of the Christian era. The evidence from those early centuries include papyri, lectionaries, inscriptions, writings, and pieces of codices that are usable by textual critics. Most good Greek testaments list this kind of material. Then what when Constantine legalized Christianity, AD 313, the manuscripts were better preserved. Now available to the textual critic are nearly 6,000 Greek texts. And by the 6th century after Christ, monks were collecting, copying, and carrying from massive amounts of evidence for the accuracy of the Greek New Testament. Inserted at this point is a chart that may help Bible students to grasp what is being said in this book about Old and New Testament accuracy. And I will see if I can. Huh. E for Kindle. I just discovered something new right here live on the air. Welcome to live teaching, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. Is the Bible genuine? In showing the genuineness and integrity of the Scriptures, there are 6 well-defined steps reaching from the beginning to the present day. Note some overlapping in time. 1, the original manuscripts. 2, ancient versions, 280 BC to 870 AD. Those containing only 280 BC to 200 AD. Those containing both Old and New Testaments, AD 150 to AD 70, or to 870. Quotations of the Fathers, that's AD 96 to 600 and onward. Then you have manuscript copies, that's from AD 250 to 350 to 1450. And then you have printed copies of the original text from AD 1477 to 1932. And then you have modern versions, AD 1380 to 1901, and even beyond. And there's some of that. And that's pretty neat. I didn't know you can do that. You can zoom in on a certain chart. That's anyway, we can't get caught up with that. Concern. Those who would be concerned about the paucity of very early manuscripts evidence should recall that all of the Greek classics have manuscripts available to study. The Iliad, for example, number only 643. The Pillars of Thucydides have 8, and Tacitus's works only 2. There are, remember, 6,000 Greek manuscripts. Not only was persecution a reason for early manuscript destruction, but the earliest New Testaments were penned on weak materials and thus were very fragile. Although the New Testament was very likely to put together as a codex or a book with folio pages, and you go back to chapter 3. 3 famous fragmentary copies have survived. 1, John Ryland's, 117 to 8138. Chester Beatty's, 8200. And Codex, which is also dated 8200. The Chester Beatty fragment contains most of the New Testament in Greek, and collators, those who characterize new discoveries, usually list 98 other papyri whose value pertains to their earliness. The evidence from 313 to approximately 8800 comes from Unsealed Greek scripts, which texts were on parchment and vellum. The more important are listed here. 1, the Codex, book form, Vaticanus, or B, is used as the most important unsealed. There are about 274 non-unsealed manuscripts, and some scholars prefer the Aleph, or Sinaiticus, next mentioned as most important. The unseals were complete Greek Bibles, both of the Old and New Testaments, and the Vaticanus, as its name implies, is kept in the Vatican Library. The text starts at Genesis 46:28, has mentioned Psalm 106 through 138, and Hebrews 9:14 through Revelation. As in all the early uncials, the general epistles follow Acts, not Hebrews. This vellum book has 759 leaves, each about 10 inches square with 3 columns per leaf. The scribe did not include Mark 16:9-20 in this Bible, but he did leave a space for it, suggesting he knew the passage existed. The Sinaiticus Aleph Uncial was discovered by Constantine North in St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of Mount Sinai. Aleph is the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet. The monks at St. Catherine's were using the leaves for their cook fires, and Tischendorf found a basket full of these leaves destined for the flames. Tischendorf became so excited about these finds that he aroused the ire of the monks, who refused to allow him to return the next 15 years. Tischendorf made friends with the Emperor of Russia, and since St. Catherine's was a Greek Orthodox monastery, the Russian Tsar begged Tischendorf's return to the monastery, where he could find nothing until on the day before he was to leave. The monastery gave Tischendorf the steward's copy. The manuscript contained part of the Greek Old Testament, all of the 27 New Testament books. Tischendorf finally succeeded in bargaining for the parchment codex and get to the British for about $250,000, or I guess I'm guessing that is dollars. And the manuscript reposes today in the British Museum. The Sinaiticus dates from AD 340 and contains 346 and a half leaves. The original 43 leaves Tischendorf found in a basket on his first visit made their way to Leipzig, Germany, and remain in the university titled Codex Frederico Augustinus. The pages of the Sinaiticus are about 13 and a half inches long by 14 and 7/8 inches high. Each page contains 4 columns about 2.5 inches wide. The Old Testament poetical books have 2 wide columns on each page. A picture is inserted here to give the reader an idea of what nutshills look like, and I will try to zoom into some of this. So take a moment to look at that. Yes, I'm drinking coffee drink in the afternoon. 3. The Alexandrian Codex, or A, dates about AD 450 and contains the Septuagint Old Testament with parts of Genesis, Kings, and Psalms missing. The Unsealing also is without parts of Matthew, John, and James. There are 733 leaves, and each is 10 inches wide and 12 3/4 inches high, with two columns and 50 or 51 lines. Vellum material is very thin, and the letters are very large and very square. Some think that A is from but it did in Alexandria, Egypt. However, its name came from its being presented to the Patriarch of Alexandria in 1078. When Cyril transferred to Constantinople, that patriarch or city bishop, and then on all Bible times, took the manuscript there. Cyril desired to give the codex to James I of England, King James Version fame, but James died before he could receive it, and so Charles I had it presented to him in 1627. The manuscript the King James translators to use. Charles placed the Alexandrius in the Royal Library, and then that king later gave it to Britain in the British Museum. In 1879-83, the complete manuscript was issued to the public through facsimile photographs. Thus, this was the first unseal to be used by Bible scholars. The Ephraim, or C, is a rescriptus. This unseal was written on a scraped-off vellum. Vellum was expensive and often used again by rubbing away the original. That left is called a palimpsest, and then rewritten or rescripted, thus a rescriptus. Sometimes in that ancient society, valuable vellums were covered by valueless, and in the 12th century, the original rescriptus, I can't even talk today. I read receptus instead of rescriptus. I don't know why. Rescriptus was again in parts and the writings of the Syrian Ephraim, 378 interspersed. Thus, the name Ephraim rescriptus left her only 6 of the Old Testament and 145 of the New Testament. Parts of all the New Testament are left except for 2 Thessalonians and 2 John. Each page relief is 9.5 by 12.25 inches with 1 wide column in each leaf. There are no text divisions except in the Gospel accounts. The Ephraim seemed to have originated in Alexandria, Egypt, for it was brought from there to Italy by a John Lascaris around AD 1500. This library was purchased by Peter Stuzzi, and then in 1533 the manuscript came into the possession of the evil Catherine de' Medici. Although Catherine was Italian, she is the mother of subsequent French kings, and when she died, the manuscript was placed in the Library of Paris. The manuscript still remains. The underlying palimpsest was discovered to be a Greek New Testament in 1834, but the chemicals used stained the parchment. Tischendorf, the finder of the Sinaiticus, was able to read version and published an edited copy in 1843. The Beza Codex, or D, is a 6th century uncial and has omissions in Matthew through John, 3 John 11 through 15, and Acts. The language is Greek and Latin. It is presently in the University of Cambridge Library in England. There are 406 leaves, each 8 by 10 inches, with one column of 33 lines per page. The Greek text is on the left leaf and the corresponding Latin on the right or next leaf. Thus, the Dcodex is the oldest known two-language uncial. The letters are unusually large and the vellum is of poor quality. This manuscript seems to be from southern France, where the church had been established by Greek-speaking missionaries from Asia Minor, and the text is found in the monastery of St. Irenaeus in the city of Lyons, France, by Theodore Beza, 1562, a French biblical scholar who migrated to Switzerland to assist John Calvin and later succeeded him in Geneva. The Beza Codex is now in the Library, University of Cambridge, England. The Claromontanus Codex, or D2, is from 8550 and supplements D. It too is written in Latin and Greek, having 533 leaves each, 7 3/4 by 9 3/4 inches. Each page has one column, 21 lines, with the Greek on the left and Latin on the right, as with D. Beza found this uncial at Clermont, France, thus the name of the manuscript, and it is kept in the National Library in Paris, France. Beza used D2 when he worked on his second edition Greek New Testament published in 1582. The Washington Nensis Codex, or W, is a 4th century uncial, maybe 5th, and contains portions of the Old and New Testaments. It is kept in the National Library, Washington, D.C., as property of the United States government. There are only 7 leaves, 5 and 5/8 by 8 1/4 inches. Each leaf has a single column of 30 lines and is an unusually fine example of these handwritten manuscripts. The scribe used a sloping style like unlike any other. There is an apocryphal edition after March 1614 not previously known, and the part containing portions of Deuteronomy and Joshua is larger vellum, 10 1/4 by 12 1/2 inches. Washington Nensis was purchased as a group of 4 manuscripts in Cairo, Egypt, in 1906 by Miss C.L. Freer. Thus, the manuscripts are sometimes named Freer manuscripts. The Codice Gospelo, or Theta, is in a Russian library in Tiflis, Georgia. Hey, look, go Georgia. And was only recently discovered. By the way, it's probably the nation of Georgia, not even the state of Georgia. Yeah, that's the nation of Georgia because it talks about Russian library. So that's not the state of Georgia. I'm laughing. I just saw Georgia was only recently discovered in the early 20th century. It is an unattractive uncial from about 750 to 800 and contains only a part of the New Testament, but it indicates how widely known such Greek New Testaments were. The large letter or uncial manuscripts are early and thus important. The 18th century scholars Westcott and Hort theorized that such manuscripts were more important than all other evidence, and thus the autography established only from the 2 earliest, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Modern versions of the Bible in 1881 have been affected by Westcott and Hort's theories. The fly in the ointment of the Westcott-Hort theory is that such uncials still remain somewhere to be discovered. Worn-out scrolls often used were discarded. Perhaps the ancients knew that certain uncials were not as accurate as others might be. Now we have chapter 6. And here's a picture that shows some of the manuscripts. And this would be Greek. This is a fragment of the Gospel of John. Oh, this is the oldest known manuscript of any part of the New Testament. It contains Luke 18:31 through 33, 37, 38, and is dated to be for the first half of the 2nd century, courtesy of the John Rowland Library. I'm surprised I could read that. But that gives you, I guess it's just a picture on the first page there. A cursive manuscript is shown above. That's a cursive manuscript. The above picture illustrates what cursives are. Some are minuscules, which are smaller cursive manuscripts that are later productions than the uncials. The uncial manuscripts stand from the 3rd to 10th centuries AD. However, there are overlappings as some minuscules were created as early as the 8th century. The number of minuscules manuscripts is not easily calculated since no catalog lists them all and new ones are often discovered. Geister lists 2,745, but Kenneth Lake, collator, listed over 3,000. 46 known minuscules contain the entire New Testament, and critical Greek testaments are listed as numbers. The uncials as letters. Minuscules are magnificent to observe because of the elaborate artistic decoration on the covers and throughout. Codex 33, a minuscule similar to the Vaticanus, uncial is a complete, beautiful New Testament, which Codex has often been labeled as the queen of the cursives. Codex 33 is Alexandrian in style, and generally cursives were of just 3 styles or genres. The other 2 are Byzantine or Western and Caesarean. The families or genres are recognized according to the scribal corrections made. Critical Greek New Testament will be recognized as C or SEB, etc. About 90% of these cursives are Byzantine. The value of the cursives as far as critical scholarship is concerned is considerably less than the value of the because the cursives are later Bibles and thus further removed from the autograph. But there are exceptions to such a rule. A 13th century minuscule may be a copy of a Greek from the 3rd century and of more value than a 4th century uncial. The number of years a manuscript is removed from the original is not as critical a problem, for variations come not from time but from scribal accuracy and consistency. Some of the minuscules agree more fully with older uncials than do some of the later uncials. Note here that those who date manuscripts are always involved in asking questions about the letters and the scribal corrections. Other evidences for the Greek New Testament. Since nearly 3,000 Greek manuscripts exist besides uncial minuscules, the others are mentioned here. Remember that the oldest Greek texts were papyri, and only about 98 still exist in fragments and date from AD 300, having originated in Alexandria, Egypt. The majuscules or uncials were usually written on sheepskin. I think that might be. No, it might not be a typo. Anyway, parchment were around until the 8900s. Come on, Jonathan, read. There are about 274 of these uncials, and about 80,000. Come on, about 80% are Byzantine. I want to say 80,000. It's a percent sign. It's not 1,000. I don't know. Minuscules, remember, account for other 2,790. Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on with me today. I just can't read today. It's like, let me start over. Minuscules, remember, account for other early Greek New Testaments. The non-biblical papyri in Ostraca, potteries were discovered at Oxyr, where that place is, Egypt, about 1896. Those finds helped biblical textual critics to establish that Greek manuscripts are representative of the type of the Greek language of the 1st century. Moulton, that's in England, Robertson in America, and Diesman in Germany have shown from such archaeological discoveries that New Testament Greek is Koine or common, everyday language of the period. The medieval Latin fathers had assumed a perfect or heavy had been used. Ostraca papyri inscriptions on catacombs, buildings, and monuments also aid textual critics in understanding the original. There are about 1,625 specimens of Ostraca and other such materials now known. Lectionaries play a particularly important role in confirming the original New Testament text. These lists of passages designed to be read in worship number nearly 2,210 and are quotations from uncials and minuscules, 245 and 196 respectively. The vast majority of the lectionary quotations are Byzantine. Since the lectionaries were designed for worship, they were very carefully copied, even more so than manuscripts. Let's look at some patristic quotations. Some believe that the entire New Testament could be recovered from the Bible quotations of 2nd and 3rd century writers. The early church fathers or patriarchs quoted great amounts of Bible in their teachings, either verbatim, paraphrase, or by allusion. There are about 36,000 quotations, and there's huge aid in dating the genres of the text from the 2nd through the 4th centuries. The early church fathers' writing patterns varied as the families of manuscripts did, but by the 5th century, nearly everyone was quoting from a text similar to the one used by the King James translators, the Textus Receptus. The most important of the early fathers were Justin Martyr, Tatian, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, Tertullian, Cyprian, Eusebius, and Jerome. Now let's look at versions. Some definitions are needed here as a background of ancient translations from the Greek. First of all, a translation is a rendering from one language to another. Therefore, an English translation cannot be considered the only standard. Erasmus published his critical Greek New Testament in 1516, but he had to translate Revelation from a Latin version. In the second place, a literal translation expresses as far as possible the exact meaning of the original. Such a translation of necessity will reveal many of the idioms of the donor language, since the receptor language is a translation of words, not ideas. Some equivalency is necessary in all translation work. For example, how would one translate the American idiom "a can of worms" into another language? However, dynamic equivalent translators strive for, quote, more than a word-for-word translation. So that's from the New NIV preface. Serious Bible students prefer a more literal translation so that they can decide what the text means. Further, to describe a Bible as a version means that it is a translation from the original language. The American Standard of 1801, actually I think that it should be 1901, is a version. Then technically King James is a revision of Tyndale's Bible, which was a revision of the Vulgate. A revised can be a title given to Bibles translated original or from another language. In the latter sense, the King James is also a revision, since it came from the language known as Old English to a newer form. A recension is what a Bible is called when it is a production or a product, critical and systematic revising of the original Greek based on all new discoveries. The English Revised, the American Standard, the Revised Standard, the New English Bible, and two Catholic Bibles are all recensions, even though the translators took liberties in the latter four. A paraphrase is not a Bible, but is a commentary. The two most famous paraphrases are J.B. Phillips' New Testament and Kenneth Taylor's Living Bible Paraphrased. Early New Testament versions. Some think that the first translation of the New Testament from the Greek was probably into the Old Latin around it should be a D and not O, 8150. Jerome later translated the Latin Vulgate, but it is nearly Byzantine, while the Old Latin versions tend to be more Western. The Sinaitic Syriac may also be from the 2nd century and was discovered by Miss Agnes Lewis and her sister, Miss Margaret Gibson, at the same St. Catherine Monastery where Tischendorf discovered the Greek Sinaiticus Uncial. The Syriac Peshitta, means common, may also be a 5th century revision, but scholarship is divided on this point at the present time. One other Syriac or Aramaic New Testament that is known as Polycarp's, containing the entire text, now known as the Philoxian Syriac. Also discovered are ancient Coptic or Egyptians from as early as the 4th century of the modern era. Bottomer papyrus is a type of the Beheric or Alexandrian Coptic, and this dialect is from northern Egypt. The southern or Sahidic Coptic closely resembles Codex D or Beza, Old Testament also, and the Thebic or Middle Egyptian Coptic is actually made up of 5 differing dialects. The Old Testament in all the Coptic Bibles follows the Septuagint, which is the LXX. Another early version is the Ethiopian or Abyssinian. When the Bible was translated into Abyssinian and the people discovered, quote, Ethiopia mentioned several times, they applied that name to their country. The language is similar to the tongues. There are also known Georgian, as Armenian versions from the 7th century. Gothic Bibles, minus the books of Kings, because the translated Germans were already too warlike, from the 7th century, Slavonic versions by Cyril from AD 850, Persian versions by Nestorius from AD 450, Arabic versions from the AD 940, and some Nubian, that's African. Anglo-Saxon, Old Persian, and Frankish not even analyzed yet by scholars. Conclusion. As with the Old Testament textual criticism, all variations in New Testament manuscripts, versions, and extra-biblical materials are considered in the search for the pure autograph. The majority of witness scholars argue that the Byzantine genres contain the true text, which is the one underlying the King James and the New King James. The neutral witness scholars basically uphold the infallibility of the Alexandrian manuscripts, which theory underlies the Westcott-Hort view and the American Standard. This, quote, neutral view says that when the papyri and uncials agree, the true text is known. The eclectic witness school is predominant among scholars today. Its position is that no genre of manuscript should be viewed as more nearly infallible, although the Alexandrian is the best. But a reading from 2 or 3 other families that is against Alexandria should outweigh it. This eclectic method is involved in the idea that text families are descendants of an earlier authentic text. This theory underlies the New American Standard, the revised version. Providential protection of the text outweighs all the above theories. True textual criticism must take into account that God's hand is in the transmission of the text. And I didn't want to jump right into translations because I wanted it to be all in one video. And so we are ready to start next week with translations. I've got to some things I've got to take care of today too before our evening programs. But don't forget, this afternoon at 5, or this evening at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, the Truth and Love program, and then at 7 o'clock Eastern Time will be our Connect meeting, Younger Preachers Connect. And I will see you tonight, and hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. And I know I'm ending early, and I've done it sometimes, but this is a need that's come up that I've got to take care of. Plus, I didn't want to just jump into translations and then stop in the middle of it.